Ladies and gents, Diablo 4's class balance is absolutely busted, and Necromancer somehow made that even worse. This is probably the most broken class/build in the entire open beta, quite literally providing complete immunity and endless damage. So here's the setup, by the way. We're basically running Blood Mist plus a neat legendary aspect that causes this skill to trigger endless corpse explosions, well, as long as there are corpses on the battlefield. Furthermore, whenever Blood Mist detonates a corpse, its cooldown is further reduced by 0.6 seconds. And from here, you simply have to press the button and see all the enemies disappear into a mist of red carnage, which further lets you detonate these new corpses for more explosions, and you kind of get it all the way to pretty much instantly deleting all enemies while still completely removing the cooldown on that skill. Assuming the group of enemies is big enough, but basically this happens almost all the time, to the point that you can use this back to back, not get killed, get complete immunity, and the damage is also off the chain. You can even combine this with the other Blood Mist upgrade that lets it leave a trail behind, which will last for a few seconds and deals extra damage as shadow to enemies. But most important, it removes the movement penalty on the Blood Mist, letting you roam around free at normal speeds. Now, the rest of the build is pretty much as simple as it gets, because essentially you don't even need anything besides these skills. So that's why in this case I maxed out Blood Mist to get the cooldown as low as possible and get as much healing as I can out of it. The enhanced version is also great, helping even more at reducing the skill cooldown, but by far the best upgrade is the Ghastly Blood Mist, which leaves a corpse behind every 1 second. This means you don't even need enemies to get killed to leave the corpses behind to start the whole chain. You can just do it automatically anyway every single second during the duration of this skill. But I also went with a maxed out corpse explosion to better fit the theme. There's a couple of upgrades in there that makes it really awesome, especially the radius increase by 15%, and then finally the plague corpse if you want it to deal extra damage against slowed, stunned, or vulnerable enemies. Now, because the build is so reliant on having corpses laying around, Decompose helps a ton with this too. This one spawns corpses by default every 2.5 seconds when using this on enemies, and gives back essences too with the enhanced version. Since I'm running this with a minions build, I went with the Acolyte's Decompose for the extra 10% minion damage. This works great against boss enemies, but you can also use the slow to get more damage out of the corpse explosion as a result. Another quick skill I recommend here is the Hued Flash, which adds another 12% chance to spawn more corpses when defeating enemies, so you can never run out of these, as these are the main source of damage for the build. Finally, I enjoy Army of the Dead a lot with this build, since its supreme upgrade lets me completely summon my entire army back, on top of the nice damage and area skill that it covers. This proves to be especially useful against solo bosses, for example. When you might have your entire army defeated, you can just summon them all back and have them deal damage. Now, will this build stay? Well, honestly, I don't really think so. It's clearly way too strong, and it provides minimal drawbacks while almost giving you complete immunity for a full duration, and also like huge damage that pretty much leaves every other class in the dust. But otherwise, I think this is going to get fixed really soon. There's a few ways in which Blizzard could probably do this. Maybe adjusting the internal cooldown of the reduction mechanic of the Blood Mist legendary aspect so that it doesn't trigger as often and it doesn't let you use it back to back. That, or they could adjust the cooldown reduction mechanic in just a way so that it only triggers when you are outside of the Blood Mist, which would kind of make sense but would completely ruin this build. Now, to be honest, I doubt any of this will change the Necromancer from being anything but a complete badass anyway, as some of its intended class mechanics are indeed super strong by default. Right now, I think that the Minion Necromancer is probably one of the best builds out there, and you really can't go wrong with it, so you can just make this strong pretty much as early as level 1. It deals huge damage, has great AoE if you use it with some of the bone abilities we're going to talk about in just a bit, and also tons of early on aspects that buff it even more. So here's the build, by the way. It looks something like this. We went with the bone splinters for some pretty solid damage early on. Its enhanced version is great for the extra chance to fire more projectiles, and the initiates upgrade to make enemies vulnerable, further buffing our damage against them. In fact, you'll notice that this build heavily favors vulnerability, and we're gonna take advantage of that at any step. Bone Spear is even more busted once you get its enhanced version to make it split into 3 and apply further vulnerability. I found this to couple really well with its legendary aspect, which makes the shards that split back to deal 90% extra damage against enemies that were previously made vulnerable. Of course, Corpse Explosion again is our bread and butter. Fully maxed out, this is going to be our other main source of damage so that it takes full advantage from the Plagued Corpse upgrade since we already debuff enemies so easily. Finally, I skipped everything else and just went straight with the Bone Spirit since I found this to be an amazing nuke. This includes the critical strike cooldown reduction and the dreadful Bone Spirit upgrades, which is going to let you regen essence super quickly once you cast this ability once. In fact, essence generation with this build is so good, it lets you spam your strongest attack super easily. We got this ring for the 10% extra chance to generate 32 essence when hitting vulnerable enemies with the bone skills, which by the way we do pretty much all the time. I also found this critical strike ring which makes bone skills to also increase essence regen for 20% up to 4 seconds. Actually does make a really huge impact. One final upgrade I really like is this one. This provides a stacking damage buff to the core skills, so whenever I consume a corpse, which is all the time, I do get to buff my core abilities. In this case, it would be that Bone Spear. So it's going to deal a lot more damage, it's going to be the main source for that, and also applies that vulnerability. Usually what you'll want to do is to start combat with bone skills. In this case, you can even go straight into the Bone Spear since the regen of the spirit is so fast, you can basically cast them almost as basic attacks. And once you get a few enemies vulnerable and even more so a few corpses going on the ground, you can just detonate them, have those damage explosions, and you're seeing at least 5 to 1000 damage per each explosion depending on the build. Otherwise, when fighting elites, you can just throw a quick Bone Spirit. It's an excellent nuke mechanic with a very short cooldown, and furthermore it gives you that spirit regen as I've talked about. And of course, this doesn't even begin to cover the fact that you are surrounded by an essential army at your side, which almost lets you go AFK completely in dungeons. These are strong enough at level 25 to tank any damage, especially when it comes to the golem that you unlock at level 20. Even more busted is that if you get a barrier buff for your character, it will benefit all your minions as well. So if it triggers on you, it also triggers on every single one of the other skeletons, providing another 3 to 500 extra HP every 30 seconds when fighting elites. In my case, I went with the cold skeletal mages by the way, just because it adds some nice extra utility on top for further freezing enemies in place. It doesn't work on bosses by the way, but elites and normal sized foes are definitely free game. This is it with the Necromancer. We'll probably jump into a blood build real soon, so I'll see you guys in the next video.